Well, I say we get going. Well, okay, good. Now it says 2:34. I was like, I felt like it was 2:34, but it's not quite yet. So hi, you all. Thank you so much for joining me for this roundtable on creative technologies and academic libraries, building our online community. So I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the head of innovative media at Virginia Commonwealth University. So we're a sort of makerspace and multimedia center combo, purpose built. So we're in our space since November 2015. So actually we're almost in 20 days, we will hit our 7th birthday in the space that we're in right now. And so the session here is sort of a follow-on to how many of you all were at the kickoff, kind of ACTAL kickoff that we had the sort of potluck, we called it, in May this past spring, I should say. So yeah, I was going to say, I knew some of you all were. It's okay, Liz, you were not. So it is quite all right either way, but because I know at least one person wasn't there, I was going to kind of recap a little bit of some of the conversation. So this session was intended as a build off of a conversation that we had there. At that session, so we had this big kind of potluck meeting where people were in 3 different groups. We rotated around to have conversations about various aspects of a new organization that we were calling ACTAL, right? This thing that you are all here to take part in. As I said at the end of the projection session that we just had, for anybody who was here for that, ACTAL's origin story, superhero origin story, was really during the pandemic. It was a couple of us getting together because we suddenly realized that it would be really helpful to just be able to bounce sort of operational questions off of each other as we were trying to respond to the pandemic, and sort of, how do you quarantine equipment? How long are you quarantining for? What kind of wipes are you getting? I mean, it was all sort of very pragmatic stuff, but we very quickly realized how beneficial and enjoyable it was to just eat. We got together probably bi-weekly at that point, or it may have been slightly less than that, but it became bi-weekly. And it was a chance to just sort of, share ideas, vent off of each other, just because one of the things I suspect many of us have realized is that we are often the only people, or at least our departments are the only folks in the library that do the kind of work that we do. And so talking to liaison librarians about running a creative technology space, they don't really know what we're talking about. I mean, they can sort of appreciate it loosely, but it is a different community. And so this little group of 6 of us grew into 7 as we started planning this sort of idea of a conference, because the more we talk to people, the more we realize that, well, at the very least, we should get some sort of national call for people who may want to just join together and chat. And so in May, we had a conversation about, sort of, all right, so that was, the origin of this group of people, but now clearly, we had like 60 something people. I don't remember if it was 60 something participants or 60 something people sign up, and a high number of the signups ended up coming together on a big Zoom call. And we talked a couple different aspects of running an organization like this and what people might want it to be. And one of the things that spun out of that, and actually I can show you a little bit here. Hold on, let me share my screen. So we had put together, a Jamboard. Are folks able to see that? So the Jamboard that's up on the screen. So yeah, cool. So we had a picnic theme. We were having fun with the idea of it being a potluck. And the main course / entree session was sort of the conversation about what do folks want out of an organization like this. And then we had others that were dealing a little bit more with the idea of a conference. And some of the stuff, of course, had to do with sort of questions of organization, like if we had a conference, would we want to charge a lot of money quote unquote, to make it a big thing? Do we want to keep the price really small? Do we want to figure out a way to do scholarships? And so it was that kind of thing. But one of the big topics that we kept hitting on was this idea of, okay, I mean, a conference is a fantastic idea, but how do we all stay in touch with each other in between some big event like that? Like, what is our community? Because so clearly the bi-weekly conversations that the few of us had been engaged with were really meaningful and helpful. And so how do we sort of make that happen, right, at a bigger thing? And so 3 different sessions, you don't need to read these, but had lots of ideas about things that they want, ways to connect, as tags here might say, connecting with people on specific technologies to help each other, or a place for professional support outside of my immediate coworkers, new ideas and all things multimedia. And so all of that is by background to say that one of the things that we want to do both here at this sort of virtual portion of the ACTAL conference that did spin out of that event last May, and again in the in-person in North Carolina State University next week, is going to be about our community building. So all of that was just sort of by way of background and setup for the discussion that we're going to have. Now to just, I basically want to pick people's brains about what will be useful for you, like what kinds of platforms or what kinds of topics, what kinds of things are folks interested in having happen. I am going to again share a screen here. Well, I guess before I do that, I guess I would be interested. So this will be interactive. This is a round table, meaning we're all actually at the table in this particular case, because I'm not going to argue that I have all the ideas. I want to throw questions out and get feedback from folks, and invite you, if you are so inclined, to put stuff onto this Jamboard. So let me make sure first that the permissions are correct, because I didn't even think about that till now. So anyone with the link is an editor. Let me copy the link. So I'm going to both share a link out to Jamboard so you all can jump onto it, and I'm going to share it. And I'm not going to assume that everybody has necessarily seen a Jamboard and used it before. So I will just do a quick kind of demo here of things that can happen as we go forward. I'm planning to use this to sort of take notes, but I welcome other people to put notes on here, other ideas, and I may ask for ideas that you can put on here or you could put into the chat. And this will make sense in a sec. The fact that it says asynchronous and synchronous just happens to be the first slide. But let me just show you. So the controls for a Jamboard, a Google Jamboard, it's basically a sort of digital whiteboard, right? Are on the left side. So the little column, you have a pen where you can write things, you have the eraser where you can erase the things you've done, a selection arrow. The thing that is probably most often used in the Jamboards as we have used them for ACTAL are sticky notes. So you click on a sticky note and you can type in information there, and you can choose your background color and say save, and it'll get posted, and then you can move it around on the board. You can also create shapes and text box, and then there's a fun little laser that I can sort of highlight things that it fades off, or one of you can, if you're so inclined. But anyway, so all of that just to say, here is a space for us to use to sort of keep some running notes on things that we may want to do to build our community. So before I dive into questions to ask of you all, are there any statements or questions to reflect back all together here in our little group? And always feel free to unmute. This is going to be very informal. So unmute or drop stuff in the chat, of course, always as well. So, all right. Well, I don't see any. So a couple things, I guess I will lead off with the question. So what, of course, I'm imagining is that there are many ways that we can all get together virtually. Exactly. No worries, Lisa. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to give feedback as we go. So And there was not so much a prompt in this particular case yet. I haven't prompted anything on the Jamboard. That was just a question to make sure folks had an opportunity to speak up if they wanted to before I dove into content. But yeah, so what I'm imagining is that, of course, there are broadly, I would say, two ways people may want to be able to interact with each other in a professional organization like ACTAL. And as I said in the description of the session in general, like, we have the opportunity to create the professional organization of our dreams as far as the community goes, and of course the other aspects. But today, in the session, we're dealing with communities, building, basically, like, how do we all stay in touch with each other and sustain it and do things that will be meaningful in a national organization of people with very specific focus. So and so I want your ideas of things that have worked for you in some organization, maybe, that you've been a part of. And it, of course, doesn't even need to be a professional organization. It could be a community organization or nonprofit. Ways that you all have managed to stay in touch, or things that you have found useful, or, of course, in a professional environment, or things you identify as being lacking, things that you're lacking and wish that you had in some other setting, and maybe we can make sure we incorporate that now. So all of these things are what I want y'all to think about and share back and forth about. But as I say, my sort of lead off presumption assumption kind of thing is to say that I suspect people are going to want both a way to be in touch with each other asynchronously, just sort of when you can get to it and you talk to each other, versus the potential for a sort of everybody's in a room, a virtual room of some nature, and what the nature of that room is can vary a lot, but all at once, and do those things maybe outside of the formality of a conference, but maybe we have some sort of regular meetup, and it could be everybody in the organization can get together. It could be regional versions. It could be lots of different things. And so this is what I'd love to get your feedback on. So would you say, I will ask this at least, is that a fair assumption that people would like to see these both ways? Feel free to throw things in chat or unmute, or otherwise share your thoughts about asynchronous versus synchronous and what you think will be useful. And that's just a broad question, not something to necessarily put on the Jamboard yet.
Has anyone considered a listserv? Because I know cataloging has one of the biggest listservs, which is the AutoCat. And if anybody has any questions, they just throw it up on there, like, what do you think about this new RDA thing? And then people can answer questions and go forth. Like, you see on there a lot of times, like, I have a book written in Japanese. Can anybody
Sure.
Can anybody read Japanese? And I will send you a screenshot. And then you just go for it there. Or somebody will say, could somebody fix this record in OCLC? And we'll get on and go that. And so if you have a lot of problems, you can do that. And people also upload like GIFs and funky little things they'll find on Facebook or other social media. And people will be like, what do you think of this? It's stupid and funny and make your day. Here you go.
Right, exactly. I just wanted to give you a smile to start the day.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. That's sort of my dream is that we become a close enough, kind of group of people to do that kind of thing, whatever the form, like whatever the venue, that's the case. So yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And so a listserv, I think, is a totally reasonable, notion for a thing like this. I did see Andy commented in the chat that sort of this idea of a bit of both approaches, synchronous and asynchronous. I saw there are workshops planned and those look great, but the ability to throw up random things in a user group or listserv or something like that would be nice. And I think that is a very fair thought, for sure. So any expansion you want to have on that? And no requirement to. That's a solid point in and of itself. Yeah, Mastodon community, of course, is part of it. So and yeah, Jennifer makes the point too that, with an unstable internet, so sorry about that, but love Slack or Discord, but those work better after you've met the people there at least once before at online or in person gathering. That's an interesting point, actually. I guess that is kind of it has, I would say, in my own experience, it has been easier. That is true. I mean, I had never thought about it that way, but it is easier when you know the folks involved kind of in some form or fashion before jumping on. I just came back from the NACIS, the North American Cartographic Information Society conference in Minneapolis, and it was the first time I had been to that. They had a conference sort of, they had, I think it was Discord that they were using, had Discord and used it to drive the back channel conversation during the conference, but it certainly seems pretty clear that they also use it outside of that. They just sort of, maybe just because I joined it for the conference, those were all the channels that I was first seeing instead of any of their other ones. I had to go in and look and discover that they have other kind of areas that they're dealing with. The Data Visualization Society, I had been to an event to as well. We'll just talk about all the things I've gone to do now. And they have a big, very active Slack community as well. So, but yeah, H Commons group. So I have not used H Commons at all. I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, that's cool. So, yeah, and I should say that during that May conversation, the idea of a Slack or Discord came up several times from several different people, because you get a little of that ability to do the kind of that same sort of listserv, almost asynchronous, let me post a thing, people can go back and find it. Is there, I mean, what are people's feelings here about sort of like, because a listserv, listserv would be super easy to set up. Just we have listservs here at VCU, and so we can do that kind of thing. I have often seen listservs be painfully underused, but I guess that's probably true of all kinds of things. So I was wondering which people thought might be a more useful approach. Like, where is your heart these days? Is it in an app like Slack or Discord, or an experience like that, or is it still listserv that you have to be potentially a little less proactive about visiting because it shows up in your inbox? I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on that. So yeah, Mike.
I think going exactly to what you just said, that the one, on the one hand, a listserv is like, it's nice because, well, it just shows up in your inbox. But I think I had mentioned yesterday in one of the groups, for me, what ends up happening is I just treat it just like email, which is I've just got a big pile of emails and it all goes into one folder. And so it's like, I check it from time to time. And in some ways, having something like a Slack or Discord channel is something that you do proactively go to and you want to use. If that's something that you check, it's 3:00 every day and I know I check there, or hey, it's Thursday, I know I check every Thursday, and you go on there. There is something more proactive about the kind of activity that you might see, as opposed to a listserv, which sometimes can just be like a question and answer. It's just, so I've got this problem and I'm throwing it out there into the ether, and will anyone respond? There is something more to kind of a, not forum based, but something that is almost like the same way that you would use like a Facebook group, where it's like more of a
Right.
ongoing kind of a conversation. It might break off into kind of topical things, but that's just kind of my experience, is that, those like Discord or Slack is a little bit more dynamic in use.
Right. I think, and what the note that I'm about to slide up here for the sort of pro Discord or Slack type thing is that one of the things that I have noticed in the successful communities that I have is that they often will have kind of the informal channels too. Like we've broken out a conversation. Like I could see an organization like ACTAL having a channel that's dedicated really to like specific technologies, almost like audio stuff, VR stuff, 3D printing. I mean, like, lots of different technology specific conversations that may split out eventually once, there's enough content to sort of warrant it or involvement. But also there's like the, sort of goofy things, like I've seen this goofy, like there's just a place to sort of turn for the fun stuff that is really, I think, at the heart of community building. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, the sort of informal relationship building stuff.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and it's like I forget who'd said in the chat before, like, it those are better if you've met the person ahead of time, say like at a conference or some
Right.
sort of a springboard thing. Well, if you're already kind of, talking with people on a more casual or level, then you might be more comfortable just to kind of throw out an issue you're having or just kind of, talk about
Right.
that. Leah, Liz just said here, personally, I keep track of Facebook groups more often than other platforms. I bet you I do too. I'm one of those people who probably always has Facebook open on a tab at work,
Right.
somewhere on one of the windows. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. I mean, that is probably the place where I do most of my sort of social mediaizing at this point. But I also don't have as many. I should say that's my more social, right? It's less professional stuff for me, but it's still the one that because I'm old, right? It's comfortable with. So trying to take another note here about challenges for a thing like Discord or the type that work best when people know each other.
I'll say one of the benefits also is that you can do impromptu meetups, right? So you could have like a Friday coffee meetup right in the apps, right? So that's really nice.
Right.
You're not like sending out links, you can just put things out there, be like, the new quest is coming out and we need help. Like, who's doing this? If you want to come on Friday morning to this chat, we'll be here. And you can have rooms set up for things like that, which is kind of nice. Whereas I just find, I do the same thing with an email list and I won't look at it. And then I'll be like, shoot, I missed that thing on Friday because I didn't check my email for 3 weeks,
Right. Yeah, my wife, I was talking to her about this, as in preparation for all this, because she also is involved in some communities where, sort of their online presence, because it's a statewide group and they're trying to figure ways to stay in touch. And one of the things they do, so sort of jumping over to the synchronous almost question and building exactly on what you were just talking about, is they do basically a month. There's maybe bi-monthly, and she said, or every 2 months, whichever way I look at that. So the bi-monthly kind of coffees, basically it's sort of everybody gets together at a time. They call it a coffee, of course, but it's on Zoom. I mean, they're all just on Zoom, and they have these sort of gatherings where everybody gets on at the same time, and then they break out into breakout rooms, right, to smaller, probably 5 or 6 people at a time, and they just spend time together. Sometimes she said they do a sort of prompt of some nature so that the group has something specific to talk about. Other times it's less. I mean, her particular group, it's a women in ministry organization that she's part of, but the sort of idea of like making sure that people do get eyes on each other and get to sort of hang out together in a space, because it is nice. I mean, I do like that as a use of Zoom, but would that be appealing to folks, like to do either monthly or bi-monthly or that kind of thing? So yeah, I see a couple yeses.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be cool. Then, I guess, and there's one of these interesting things, like, while we're a small organization, it's probably easy to just be everybody. But I always want to say, like, is there benefit? And this is one of these. Oh, good. Thank you, somebody, for taking that note for the online copy. Is there benefit? Do you think one of the things that had come up in the original, in our May conversation about this kind of stuff when we were sort of kicking it off a little bit, was about regional groups, sort of like, let me then get together with the people who are, like, for me, it may be the Mid-Atlantic, or because I'm in Virginia, or the Southeast or something like that. Or does that not have meaning for people now that we are in this, like, we're all in touch with each other anyway kind of world? I mean, I'm happy either way. I'm just curious, again, what you all think, because again, we get to decide what it looks like. Yeah, and that's Joy makes a good point. It says the online coffee might be difficult some months given changing workflows, but it would be interesting. And I think one of the things that I would imagine the way of doing it would be like, 1 month it's a Tuesday, 1 month it's a Wednesday, the next month it's a Thursday, and then rotate around, because that way it's not like, oh, it's always going to be, Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, so that people can sort of back and participate if they're on the West Coast or that kind of thing, or 4 p.m. Eastern. And then it just turns out if you always have a conflict at that time, that would be very sad. So yeah, Liz, you have a thought.
Let's see. I don't know if y'all. Okay, there we go. All right.
Yeah,
Sorry, I've been multitasking a lot.
Totally
here.
understand.
I'm in the makerspace at the moment, so all you see me is just looking down, or doing something, or running around. But anyway, I've been paying attention. So one thing that I kind of like, this is something that I tried doing with Nation of Makers, and I was gonna call, like, we were all, yeah, let's do this. Let's like have like these, we loosely called them spaghetti sessions, because like, let's see what sticks, like our ideas, so to speak.
Nice. Sure.
And I love that idea. I love that concept, and I want to kind of go back to it. This is like, I can't remember if it was actually in the pandemic, and so I think there's a lot of things going on with people's lives, and so I think it didn't have an opportunity to stick, to use our own punny metaphor or whatever. But trying to get something like it again, and then thinking about why, somebody else also said that Facebook groups work really well, because it's kind of like a micro learning kind of way. You can consume it when you have time, like when you've got like literally 5 minutes of something, you could just read some comments, or you know what I mean. And so like, I don't know, I'm spitting this back out to y'all, what's in my brain, and trying to figure out a way to like, what's a way to micro learn and micro have conversations within, like, it's such an abstract idea. So it's like, how do you apply what social media is doing well in those like kind of micro sessions, but also for us to keep track of it. Like the way I keep track of Facebook is because I'm on Facebook. You know what I mean? So what, I guess starting with the platform, I think is important, is for if we're thinking about it that way. I think that's kind of what we're doing right now, is thinking about sort of platform that's better than a listserv, because that just becomes, for me personally, like I like listservs and I'll read it if I can, but it's more just clutter in my inbox, and then I just never get around to it. I just put it all in an archive folder, and I'm going to get to this one day, and then I never do.
Right.
So it has to be a little bit like incentive of like, this will disappear in 5 hours, like in a social media conversation. Once it's like past a certain time, you don't really like respond to things, or it doesn't show up in your feed. And so I think that keeps people on social media in a way. So I think listing out like some of like the attributes, I guess, what works for people. So like time sensitive, micro dosing or micro learning, if you will. And then, like stuff like that, I think is helpful to think of it in those kind of parameters, kind of like when I'm setting up I'm almost thinking, I guess I'm talking out loud, and I know I'm just kind of like just droning on here, but I'm just making all of these connections in my brain. What if we think of turn ourselves into the client, if you will, like, like instructional designers, or like you're working with an instructor, how would you help us as an instructional designer, or somebody in our position, to try to connect with us as the client, or the students, or the end users? And I don't know that question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm kind of just throwing it out there, because I have no idea, and I would love to be able to connect with more community and keep these ideas going.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Other reactions to anything Liz said?
I'm totally tracking with the idea that it's almost like you would have to arrive at what platform it's going to be to figure out, how it's going to manifest itself. And that's the sort of thing where it's like, even if it does break into, kind of regional groups, kind of having their own sort of community. Well, doesn't it make more sense still that if the larger group if everyone was using the same channels, and it wasn't like, oh, that's right, sorry, the Northeast folks are using something different than Like they're using a Facebook group and the other people are using Discord and the other people. It's like that doesn't really make sense. It's
Right,
almost worth
right.
maybe sending. I mean, you'd have to make sure it's a good survey because survey writing is an art. Of sending a survey to the larger group, just about kind of ranking your
Right.
preferred methods or kind of, I mean, however you would want to tabulate, what makes sense at the end. It's not just like, you take whatever people say, but, it's almost like I always say, what it's like the weighted rating. It's like how they vote for like MVP in baseball. Like, if half the people say this person is their number one choice, but half the people didn't even have that person as number one. Whoever they had is, if everyone had the same guy at number three, that's the MVP.
Right.
So what, I don't know how it
Ranked
works.
choice voting,
Yes,
right? So,
yeah. So
yeah.
there's an actual doing a wide survey, just kind of asking general questions or feedback because people will probably have wildly varying preferences, but really at the end of the day, though, it is kind of a preference, and if it's something that's important,
Right.
I'll get on board with a listserv if I have to.
I mean, yeah, I think one, and so I switched over. You'll see I have a another board for this Jamboard. If you scroll at the top, I mean, now you're seeing it on my screen, but where you can just click over to the right, and I have just one that's called miscellany, and this is just another place for me to keep notes on things, and feel free to add other ideas in here too. But yeah, I think that ultimately probably is going to be the case, right? Like we're going to look at something and be like, okay, well, here are all the channels that are possible, I mean, within some scope of reason, right? And like, which would you use? And so people check that off. And that's my one concern about Facebook, is that I know people in this world who refuse to use Facebook. And it's not, and so even if we were like, it is the way that ACTAL is going to get together, they just said they have sort of a moral complaint about that idea, and I want to honor that. Obviously, that there is a trade-off about that kind of thing, and so if that's where everybody else wants to meet, that is true. But if it turns out sort of this ranked choice idea that Mike is sort of kicking out, where it's like, yes, I would meet if it were on Facebook, I would also meet if it were on Slack, or I would meet if it were on Discord. Like, I'm easy if it's any of those three. And listserv I'd be slightly less interested in, but if it turns out that everybody is like, what we want is carrier pigeons, like we're going to communicate with each other with carrier pigeons, and that's what ACTAL will become known for. I was like, that's great. Well, like if people will do it, that would be awesome. So I'd be very happy with that. So, but yeah, so I think I would not be shocked if, yes, exactly, the Google form kind of just, sent out to everybody who has expressed interest in ACTAL stuff, right? That we just end up doing that. I think that'll be a very good idea. So, oh man, so no pigeon coops at all. I mean, is that a rule? Or is that just a reality? So, pigeon coops in 5-mile radius. So I am gonna bounce to another. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Makerspaces will do these things. So there are a couple specific things that I want to tackle too in our time together that came up in that sort of initial conversation that we had in May about ways that we build community. And there were some specific things that came up multiple times in those. We've just sort of touched on really this first one, so there's not really a whole lot more to do about it. It's like, people expressing an interest in meeting up informally, i.e. outside of a conference, is really what that meant. Was we just want to be able to connect with each other outside of that. So that's really what we've been dealing with here. Another thing that is connected to that is this very specific desire to talk about specific technologies. Like, I want a platform, whatever that platform is, to ask questions about specific things that we have going on, or I have this technical problem, or that kind of thing. What I would love your thoughts on, is that merely like, yes, while we consider our platform, we should make sure that we have a channel for that to happen. I mean, for instance, that's where I feel like a sort of Discord or Slack where you can sort of dive into a specific channel is helpful. Whereas a listserv, you sort of get that situation where you're like, well, now, is that only the technical questions? Is it sort of everything? So I show my bias a little bit to say that I feel like listserv becomes complex when it tries to answer too many different needs, and all it is for the organization. But yeah, exactly. Like, oh, that'd be interesting. So the emergency phone line idea, right? Like your bat phone, the classic, like, gotta call a group, talk to everybody, see what's up. So
that would be, so one thing that Nation of Makers does really well is that they have like every now and then, or like not even Nation of Makers, there's also another makerspace, something academic, something on Facebook. There's a lot of groups where people just pose questions like online and say,
right,
hey, how can you help me with this 3D printed this something, right? Technology. Experiential learning doesn't work that way. It's really hard to really grasp the problem when you don't understand the problem. And so, if we pick a platform like, social media, it'd be really cool to have that, like the bat signal, like, hey, is anybody free right now? Or it will be free in like a few hours to like jump on this party line, and, we could all troubleshoot.
Yeah. That would be excellent.
Cool.
I'm going to also, of course, save the chat. So there will be a little bit of repetition, but it's just to make myself think of things multiple times. So so don't be shocked if not everything goes on there, but some things do, just because I'm a weird note taker. So yeah, I think that would be excellent. Like, let's just troubleshoot this situation, right? Like, could a couple people get on and we just do that?
Or it doesn't even have to be like an emergency line. It could be like, hey, for me personally, I've been seeing a lot of a particular type of 3D printer. It prints at a 45-degree angle, and it's got like the belt that comes out, and you can print like giant swords and stuff. Have y'all seen that recently?
I have not seen that. That's cool.
That's
that makes
what I'm
total
saying.
sense.
And so I've been seeing a couple of them popping
Huh.
up, and I'm like, who's tried this? I would like to know some feedback before I buy it, or like what their thoughts are on it, because you know how it is. Like, you don't want to buy a piece of technology if it's never been used by anybody, and it's probably like still like kind of real beta, I think, at this point. So I'm not first to market kind of person. I like to be sit back and kind of ask questions. And so I saw it recently again at like Maker Faire Orlando. Somebody was posting about it there, and I asked him if he hadn't used it. So it's just stuff like that. Whenever I want to buy stuff, like get people's input in like a more like less written way, like
Right.
You can't rate feelings. I mean, you can write your feelings down, but it's like it doesn't translate all the time in like when you write it down.
Right. Yeah, that would definitely be useful. Okay, good. We are an official Zoom call now because there's a cat. So I think that was a cat. Did I see a cat? So,
There it is.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome.
But,
Excellent. Thank you. So
bingo.
Achievement unlocked. So that's right. So our meeting can wrap. No, so yeah, I think the yes, any place to be able to get just input on purchasing is huge. I mean, I keep wallowing in the, like, it was so easy when we started our makerspace to sort of look at lists from other spaces, or it was early days. I mean, I always think it's funny when I give a tour to librarians and I'm like, ours is sort of a classic makerspace, which is just a funny phrase because the whole thing is like 10 years old as an idea, in libraries anyway. And sort of 3D printers, laser cutter, sewing stuff. Like, we sort of put together a pretty good academic makerspace. CNC machine, we just sort of did all these things, vinyl cutter. And then like, I don't feel like there's some new tech, like the next phase of makerspace that I've missed, but I also fully admit that I'm not as tuned into that world now as I used to be. So that's part of it too. But a place to have these conversations like this, belt driven, I mean, it's still 3D printing, but like it's a good next version of it. Actually, I want to get into food 3D printers because I feel like that we should have a network of libraries that all do like different, chocolate and sugar and all that kind of thing. That's a side dream. But other thoughts, do anybody have any other thoughts about like the desire to talk about specific technologies or kind of what a feature you're looking for in a platform that would let that happen? I think one thing that would be really nice is if there were some way, and of course I don't know that this is actually easy to do, to sort of keep tabs on the technology that has been talked about at some point, so you can go back kind of easily. Probably it's just the search capability of a given platform, but it would be kind of nice to be like, we pulled together info on 3D printers or info on microphones or that kind of thing. But any other thoughts on specific technology question? And if not, that's fine because I have another prompt. But yeah,
no, the only thing I'd say is that I think if whatever the platform ends up being, that if there's a way to kind of break it out kind of topically where it might not necessarily be well, hey, let's just talk about 3D printers, but I'm trying to think of a conversation that 3D printers might fall under. Like that might be a way to categorize it. But as long as there's kind of avenues, channels, or kind of threads to kind of go back, that you can always go back further kind of to revisit, but it might be an ongoing conversation. I mean, that's more of a kind of an old school forum style setup.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Maybe there are subjects for maker spaces, which would include 3D printers, and then video studios and equipment checkout. I mean, these are just the ones we've kind of talked about during our roundtables here so far. So obviously there's interest in those.
Right.
I do a lot of teaching in technology. So like on Tuesday, I just got hit up to talk about how to record a good commercial. And
excellent.
So what's the best free video editor out there? So it could be that broad, or it could be like, video editing. It could be, strictly 3D printers, so it depends on how specific you're talking.
Right. Yeah. And what I could imagine happening too, obviously, is as conversations go on and it starts turning out that you're having a lot of specialist conversation, you do spin off a sort of separate, again, if it were a thing that had channels, for instance, that's sort of an easy one to be like, you start with it being a makerspace channel, it ends up being, like you say, you're sort of becoming more specialized. That would make sense. Starting right, going to
something I like to hear about is what doesn't work for people. Like I love hearing like, hey, we've had a lot of experience with this. It's been great, it's been working for us, but I love when people like, I'm like, oh, do tell. Especially when because every person's campus is different, every community is and so some things things you can't control just are going to work. Like yesterday when we were talking about one button studios, like half of us are like, yeah, no one's using them, they stink, it's unreliable. And then someone chimed in, it's like, I'm actually really surprised to hear you guys say that, because my one button studio, we like, it's everyone's using it every day, it's great, it's the greatest thing ever. And it's not like any one person is right or wrong, but for me, those are really good conversations to have. It's like, well, why is it working for you? Why isn't it working for me? I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a great point. That's awesome. Oh. All right, so pivoting to another idea about building online community that came out several times in our May conversation is the idea of a shared resource repository of some nature. Like, what could it look like? What should it look like? I mean, my very, sort of initial thought is like a big old Google Drive that people could just drop all kind, the challenge would be organization, as is always the case. But, the idea was, as described a couple of times, was like, I would love to not have to recreate how to use a MakerBot 3D printer guide because somebody else has one, and we can repurpose that, we could get, and rightly so, be really intentional about like Creative Commons kind of ideas so that we can spread those things out. So yeah, and again, so talk to us or write up if you can. Like HCON, I guess I should just look at it because I'm just not familiar with it at all as a
Sorry.
platform.
Yeah, no, it's just Humanities Commons. It's very easy to create individual profiles or create sort of group structures. The Music Library
Okay.
Association uses it as well. It's sort of like a group structure, and
Okay.
it's a great place to deposit work that you can share.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Yeah. That's great. So that just goes to show how far since I've been like digital humanities world. So which is terrible of me. So yeah, that's cool. Okay, well now I have a tab open, as is always the case for the thing like that I'll go back and look at later. But yeah, so I think that's exactly it. We're looking for a good place to be able to do an organized way to share resources. And I know we've created things like sort of basically a guide to creating a podcast. We call it an audio production because of course you could use the same thing for technically an audio production that is not a podcast per se, but it was really done because of interest in podcasting. And again, we have guides for different kinds of equipment. And so I think in that, I almost wonder if what we would need in that case is somebody who has dedicated themselves to like being the manager of a space like that, because it's fantastic for people to be able to throw stuff in there. But my fear is it could get disorganized, or at least somebody to set up the initial organization. And then exactly that. As you said, Joy, we would just link right off the ACTAL website for that kind of thing. I think that would be the ideal with that. And if we end up if people do video trainings, it is so interesting. It's always a challenge because, of course, you want to personalize these things, right? Or like you want to have your institutional identity or a picture of your own space or your, a video shot in your own space. But also, isn't it a shame how much we end up sort of duplicating effort? But on the other hand, you can at least say, I can turn to somebody else's for an example of stuff that I use, and I can repurpose some of it, but maybe not all of it. But anyway, other thoughts on this sort of shared repository idea?
It might make sense to, whatever the ground rules will end up being for it, if it's things that people can edit and add to, for it to maybe reflect what the channels would be or avenues would be in whatever platform we use for discussions and stuff. Like if it's Discord and there's
right,
or Slack or something, and there's particular kind of conversations happening within the tracks there, as long as there's an easy way for you to kind of connect it or say, oh yeah, hey, I'll just drop it in the drive or whatever, for there to kind of connect it. If there's some sort of synergy between the two,
right,
that'd be nice.
That's a nice thought. Yep, absolutely. I think that'd be great. That would be a good idea. Other ideas? I think this feels to be a thing that will really just, as it gets used, like it'll give itself direction, right? I think it'll be easy to do an initial dump probably from a lot of us. Just say like, yeah, sure, you can use our guide for your stuff too. And then maybe, I can actually see some work eventually. I would love to see people sort of collaborating across institutions on creating some really nice, guide of some nature. Like, we don't just have to knock out the quick hitter. We can do something that's really kind of carefully created, produced, that kind of thing would be, in my dream, that would be really super excellent. Well, we have 8 minutes left. Okay, all I had was miscellany. So a couple other things, they are miscellaneous things, so I'll tag that I just had notes on that people mentioned, and actually they came up in the projection too. One of them did, was the idea of mentorships as a community building thing, which again, I think that's a fantastic idea. Okay. Oh, thank you, Liz, for that link. So yeah, we will definitely take a look at that as well. But yeah, sorry, I just opened that link and I thought I shared that out by accident. Sorry. But yeah, sort of buddies or mentorship kind of opportunity. Again, I think that's come up a couple times. So I think that would be super cool thing to pursue, and just, people who feel like they have done this long enough to feel like they could mentor others versus folks, because everybody can mentor other people and everybody can be a mentee. And I would never say that is not the case. And so I think probably putting together a sort of list of like, I'm happy to mentor about these topics would be a really helpful kind of idea. So I would love your feedback on that. I will also toss out a couple other ideas. We've actually already gotten approached, which I think is super cool, about acting as consultants for another space that's going to open up. And and I mean, we ACTAL, not we like VCU. Somebody, associate provost of an institution reached out and said, we're putting together a space like this. We would love to have 2 or 3 of your members, come and talk to us about your experience with these kinds of spaces. And so, which is really great, and not at all anything any of us had thought about ahead of time. Like, we didn't come into this thinking, oh, what we should do is set up the ACTAL consultancy. But that's really exciting. And then we have also, I don't think he's on this call. Let me just make sure. So yeah, we've had some conversations too with Scott Spicer, who some of you all know, and then just others internally, about the idea of an ACTAL journal. He's interested in a sort of one-off publication that would be, a pretty, and at some point he'll definitely be reaching out probably to everybody. We'll figure out some way to get word out that he's going to put out a call, I think, for, I don't mean to jump the gun for him by any means, but just so you all know that he's been talking about the idea of a kind of a one-issue publication that is a very, in his wording, multimodal, kind of multimedia articles about the operation and the use of spaces like ours. So it'd be sort of a scholarly but also multimodal kind of thing. Separately, we had been talking the sort of organizers about the idea of eventually we could have a journal. That's not really specific to community building, but I tossed that out to you because of course it is community building in its own way, but it's not really what we're talking about in this particular call. So mentorships, consultations, journal, these are all kind of miscellaneous things connected to community. What in there resonates from you all? What other ideas might we also want to make sure that we consider when we're talking about building the community of ACTAL, and particularly the community when we're not all together at a conference? Penny, then we may be fine. So all right, well, we've solved it all then. So it's great. Yeah, okay, the shared repository. Yeah, sorry, I just saw your comment in the channel. That's about seeing the tag someone, but yeah, exactly. So I think that shared repository, yeah, exactly. Shared signage almost would be really good too, actually, in that regard. So, but so cool. Anybody, as the one big one that I sort of want to touch on was the mentorship question, and whether anybody has any good experiences with that kind of thing, and how to, in any other organization that has done a nice job of sort of formalizing that. I'd love to hear your suggestions.
I've never had experience with that necessarily. I think it would just be a question of, how do you figure out who might be a good fit? 2 people together because they're in similar situations and they might be able to just kind of be friendly, go back and forth and stuff. Or is it something where it's like, for me, it's like, I'm kind of, new in my position or something. It might make sense if I have someone who's got lots of experience. It's trying to figure out what, whether it's personalities or experience or the field that you're in, even a regionality thing. If it's, a mentorship, I mean, I guess those are all just factors to them to think about.
Yeah, exactly. Like what's in person versus like, does it matter if you just zoom across to each other, that kind of thing. So, okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that thinking, and we'll make note of that as well. The questions that we'll have to sort of address as we start moving in any direction like that. My suspicion is that, phase one is going to be about just sort of getting people able to communicate with each other, right? Like in non-conference, non-mass settings, non-synchronous settings.
I was
and-
the co-chair of the new membership roundtables mentoring committee.
Hey, excellent. So yes,
a while
please.
back. So what you basically do is you send out a call and say who would like to be mentees and who would like to be mentors. And there is a form you fill out, like what kind of library you're into, what would you like to be mentored on, just kind of like a questionnaire. And then the whole committee gets together and looks at it and goes, okay, who would be good with who? And you have to put that together. And it's so the whole committee gets together and says like, well, and the committee may act as a mentor or as a mentee or something like that. So like say I work in an academic library. One of my coworkers was up for mentee and I was like, I can't be her mentor. That would just be too weird for me to mentee her because she's down the hall. So you got together a committee who matched people. And it was kind of like if, you're matching which ones are the most alike.
Right, whatever alike means.
Yeah, now it's more like, okay, so this person needs information about a 3D printer and this person has ideas about a 3D printer, and you put them together.
Right.
You don't put the person who wants information about 3D printer with VR, because the VR person is going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So that kind of thing.
Right,
but
that makes sense.
If we go for that, I'm more than willing for people to pick my brain, or I'm not going to take it out and pass it around because that's gross, but more than willing to share information of how ALA did it.
That's awesome. That would be wonderful, actually. Really appreciate that. So I have made note of that as well. So great. Thank you so much. Yes. This is why this is important community building, right? Make connections with people who know what they're doing. So really appreciate that. All right, well, we have reached our 3:30 time, and I do want to honor everybody's time. So again, thank you very much for participating in this. I think, we've gathered really solid sort of hopes and interests from people in terms of what could be next. And I would say we are very likely to be sort of that very early idea, right? Like reaching out by survey and other, forms to sort of start figuring out what approaches will work best for everybody. We'll talk about this a little bit more next week in person at NC State, not this formally, but just sort of more of the community building stuff. And because again, the whole point of this is that this is an organization that we want to serve everybody. We want to set it up from the beginning to be as useful as possible. And so we really appreciate everybody's input through all those steps, and we'll welcome participation from others who have good ideas or a real energy around any of the aspects of things that we've talked about so far. So with that said, I will wish you all a happy afternoon. Hope that you have a great time. Thank you again so much for coming. And I hope to see many of you in North Carolina next week. Have a good afternoon.